that we do not know about. But the people that we do know about, the sponsors of this event, I'd just like to name them to start off with. So funding is coming from the English Department, Holloway Poetry Series, the Othering and Belonging Institute, Stone Chair Funds, the Rhetoric Department, and here I especially want to shout out Fumi Okiji, for funding reasons, but not just practically, but also for always bringing poetry, love, and generosity into the room of academia. Of course, Diva, Tundra, and Faith Enmark and Selina Young from the Rhetoric Department, then the Black Studies Collaboratory, and especially Lee Rayford. The Townsend Center for the Humanities, and especially Stephen Best, the Arts and Research Center, and then especially Beth Pyatot and Glory McPhee. And Pegasus is doing book sales. They're right outside in the hallway, and I just wanted to mention that. And then Mo Dick for filming tonight. But of course, I want to especially give my thanks to Pamela Sneed and Claudia Rankine for joining us here in Berkeley from New York City. Yes. I'm so glad that we made it happen. Thank you so much for coming out here. I will not be reading their bios because you have internet in case you want to know specifics. And also you already know them. You're here because you're fans, right? I first met Claudia at the Racial Imaginary Institute's Whiteness Symposium that was held in New York City, and it was 2018. I also met Pamela in 2018 at the book launch of Sweet Dreams, quite a few books ago already. But maybe 2018 doesn't matter at all. Maybe the timeline doesn't matter. We're going to be talking about time and maybe different interpretations and conceptions of time tonight. And since meeting them, we have been in conversation around questions of commemoration. And that is why I wanted to bring the two of you here tonight. I think this might be the first time that you are in conversation in public together. Funeral Diva is Pamela's latest book, right? It tells the story of surviving the AIDS crisis in New York City as a Black lesbian, and it asks, who takes care of the caretakers? And then, of course, Claudia Rankine in Citizen, an American lyric. This would be your fatal flaw, your memory, vessel of feelings, speaking about daily encounters of anti-Black racism, and how that shapes not just the present, but also the future, how the heavy weight of these encounters shapes how you feel, see, and feel the future. So it was through the ongoing conversation in their work around commemoration that I felt very much inspired to write a book that is now called Taken Down, Scattered Monuments and Queer Forgetting. And Claudia and Pamela were both really generous interlocutors for that book. And yeah, again, this is why I was hoping to bring them in conversation about commemoration here tonight. Pamela Sneed kindly wrote the foreword of Taken Down. And Pamela writes, Taken Down fundamentally shapes new ways of thinking to forget, reconfigure, unlearn the ways we have been taught to commemorate and memorialize. And it is funny to read that in her foreword to that book, because that is exactly what I thought that both Pamela's and Claudia's work do, right? This kind of reconfiguring and this unlearning of the ways that we are taught to commemorate. I want to start with sharing an example of something that I talk about in Taken Down, as a kind of contextualizing of this evening. I bring in the example of Stumbling Stones. Stumbling Stones is a project by a German artist, and it's these stones that are placed on the sidewalk in front of houses where Jewish people were deported during the Second World War. These stumbling stones depend on smooth sidewalks. In order for these stumbling stones to form a disruption, to form an interruption of your walk, across these sidewalks, they have to sort of stick out, right? So I'm talking about this dependency on a smooth and institutionalized environment for these stumbling stones to have a disruptive effect. I'm also talking about stumbling stones in a different way. I'm wondering, what are the ways in which stumbling stones are always already happening? What are the non-institutionalized, not accounted for, not announced forms of commemoration that we bump up against every day? And of course, this deeply resonates with what both Pamela and Claudia do in their work, right? So the example that I give, for example, is that when using a wheelchair on the sidewalk and there is no ramp or slope that allows you to cross the sidewalk to the next one, that is a moment of commemoration. It's an encounter with the history of ableism. It is an encounter with the design that tells you that your embodiment, your presence, is not taken into account. And so it is these moments of stumbling that we might want to see as sites of commemoration, not just the sites of commemoration that are announced as such, that are a project, right? And of course, the use of everyday experiences, everyday frustrations and joys as theoretical and poetic sites deeply resonates with Claudia and Pamela's work. I also wanted to bring in the stumbling stones because I stumbled in preparing this evening. I prepared 2 weeks ago, nervous as I was. And it had been such a long-standing conversation around commemoration. I thought, okay, we have so many questions. We have discussed all of this already, actually, drawing from Just Us, right? Claudia's latest book and Funeral Diva. But then both of them, completely surprised, sent me a new manuscript. Yeah, unpublished, new work. And it made me super stumble, if you can say it like that. And it brought me to the contemporaneous of this moment. And that's where I wanted to be with you all tonight, not knowing it would be so many. But first of all, I'd like to say, tomorrow there's a global strike happening for Palestine. Please feel inclined to join. And then the second part of this, right, of the contemporaneous, is to bring in your contemporary work, to bring in these new manuscripts. Claudia's manuscript on collapse. I'm not going to say too much because she's going to read, and we'll be talking about it. And you also get a chance to ask questions, right? So be prepared for that, or stumble your way through it. The amount of grief that comes through both of the new manuscripts that you sent me made me stumble, and it made me, in some ways, feel completely unprepared to have this conversation tonight. Not knowing exactly where to center and how to center. It made me kind of collapse. Pamela's manuscript 929 refers to the minutes and seconds that George Floyd was held to the ground when murdered. And so you can see that the grief that's oozing here, also in relationship to Claudia's collapse, speaking of people who died, but also speaking of an earth at its end. It's just here with us tonight. And so I want to call you in this space tonight to hopefully join me in feeling that kind of tenderness in approaching both of your new works, and not having seen many readers yet. And allow for the feeling of collapse to be with us a little bit. And so I'm hoping that you're present here with us in a kind of generosity. And what's going to happen is that Claudia's going to read, Pamela's going to read, we're going to have a conversation. You'll be invited in at some point. And thank you for being here.
I'm scanning to see if my daughter has arrived. She Thank you all for coming out, for being here. Thank everybody who has put in time and effort in making this evening possible. And to my dearest, thank you. Thank you. This manuscript is new, so if you don't like it, just tell me. I'll do something else. The title is Triage, which came from something my daughter said. We were in Berlin, and I was talking to some students at Dartmouth, and there were these guys, Dartmouth guys, and they kept saying, my black friend says, I don't understand why you use terms like people of color. And I was trying to explain the history of those terms. And then my daughter raised her hand and she said, well, she has said what she has said, but I have a feeling that a lot of the language is triage. And so this manuscript is called Triage. When the theorist was asked during a Q&A how they felt, given what they knew about the world, they said sometimes they wanted to throw themselves in front of a speeding car. That got everyone's attention. They knew it would. They were a bit of an exhibitionist. They said they weren't suicidal, but they were exhausted. They used a different word that had to do with spilling over, that I don't now recall. The desire was to enter the busy street, drop down where they stood, and let the world's vehicles roll over them. The fantasy has its appeal. They said, when the exhaustion overtook them, they knew it was time to lay it all down. The overwhelming too muchness, that's the word the theorists use, prevents sleep and suspends me in the space of the collapse, where one is on one's own in the moment of the fall, falling voluntarily or not. In this way, collapsing is like sleep or death, but only like it. At the moment of collapse, one falls fully clothed, if one is fully clothed, as if nothing matters. The desire to throw oneself down, despite what all the novels say, has little to do with sex and everything to do with breath. To be disheveled, rumpled, creased, to fall out of our modes of decorum and civility means little. I like to think that this form of collapse is momentary. This is my attachment to life speaking. I want to think we enter the collapse with the idea that at some future moment, one must be ready to soldier on. Which is not to say one couldn't fall asleep or die and defy wakefulness in many ways. To stay in the collapse while remaining in this world would have us drowning with a whole other kettle of fish. We are not there yet, at least not collectively. I don't think so. I want to say that to collapse is, after all, a lapse in time or judgment, but this is bullshit, of course. Don't use the word or a word in the word to describe the word, especially when it's known that the Latin origin of collapse means falling together. I'll revise and say the collapse is in part about feeling spent and a lot about feeling helpless in the moment. I say this from experience, which might count for something. What if we always had to figure out what was happening to our buckling limbs in real time? As we are released into the gestalt of this century. Here is where the collapse begins. With an external pressure that drops you into a feeling of immense, inordinate, massive, devastating, staggering, irrepressible, unbearable emotion that could break you apart. Apart rhymes with heart. My heart aches. Did I say already the theorist was dying? Could the letters C and O in collapse not signal poisoning? VICO, more laboriously known as carbon monoxide. This odorless and colorless gas exists with us, like our culture of violence and capitalism and inhumane practices and climate change and all the other realities we push aside as we continue on. One mode of pushing is the phrase, we know all about it. But knowing doesn't make anything less poisonous. I'm thinking we should give ourselves that understanding at least, at the very least. This is where the couch comes in. Padded cushions with no sag springs, held together by material designed to take the wear and tear of all the ups and downs. Now, that does sound like sex. But only if we were all of life, if sex were all of life, including an immeasurable, unbearable, predatory violence that leads to unimaginable assault and wretched despair, the pathetic disgrace of it, the unrelenting cruelty, the sudden arrival of it, the repeated abuse, the unwarranted advance of it, which means not sex, but something else, tragically. At times, from a prone position on the couch, collapsing could be considered an act of tenderness towards the self. The too muchness acknowledged, the weightiness of it. But to speak of it solicits, well, there are gestures from others. Not exactly an eye roll, but a look away, a look down, a look at the third one there, a shadow, maybe, the wave of a hand, the yawn, seemingly uncontrollable, the crossed leg, the uncrossed leg, the pursed lip, the folded arms, communicating what? Debbie, 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 straighten up, stand tall, lighten up, don't worry, be happy. Always look on the bright side of things. Life. To speak of it, well, we know there are subtle adjustments we ourselves make mindlessly to what is being felt, what is being done, not just to oneself, not just within plain sight. And these bodily gestures, they connote all kinds of actions proximate with the shut-eye. Eat this, stretch, rom-com, glass of water, still or sparkling, jazz, a jog, gin and tonic, hydrate, some wine, and the favorite, just breathe. Because in that world out there, the theorist died some days ago. Not true. It always feels like yesterday. but the years are adding up. Close to their end, they said, "Be grateful you lived this long. We've been poisoned. You will die soon too." I held my ground, I straightened and stood tall. I yelled back at them, "What kind of person are you? Don't take away a life before it's gone." They responded, "It's okay. Resist all you want. I can take it." Then they coded out. They were apparently not the only one piling death on. The theorist might be a stand-in for all manner of governance, having every surname in the good book that doesn't mind handing out death sentences to the living. Luckily, somewhere, someone is performing the glory of Icarus before the fall. If I suspend reality and stay with them in the seconds of flight, I can see beauty in what soars. For as long as it lasts, how does one make that eternity? How does one make that the promise? The light's texture, its softness almost tangible, though I confess to you now, in a sky full up with weather, beauty is communicated only by a red-orange sun, leading as it does into the coming years. Man-made comforts, coloring everything. We outsourced and outsized the human scale and progressively reneged on what's life-size. Now, alas, all bets are off. The earth is out. No more to give. The end. It's driving us crazy. Perhaps the time before the fall could exist as the belief that we are smarter than our delusion. If we could get to a point of holding on to all we know, then we could know we are collapsing, even as we are soaring. If everything is piling on except the possibility of a future, I understand why we won't say presence and presence departing at the same time. The couch will be a place to move from. The theorist might have reminded me from within the collapse. There is symmetry to the couch's need to receive and our need to announce we are in need of a place to land. The mouth grabs at air as if breath will be the last breeze to rouse us. I collapse into silk-covered cushions to leave with more. And I don't mean more dreamy delusion, even though couch takes its name from the French word for sleep. And despite TikTok's delulu is the salulu, I don't know why we won't just say the future is behind us. We know it already, but it needs to be said, or we will struggle against the wrong ones. Far from the trunks of trees, roots are surfacing in the road like a global insult that refuses to be covered over, devastate the landscape, and create displacement. Then migration is inevitable. It exists for anyone who has held a passport in a country with resources that were in another's sightline. Turns out if a tree is felled in a forest and nobody hears, the bill is coming. Then add 2 more degrees to the surrounding ocean and more land becomes inhabitable. The realignment of life and loss is coming into sync in inhuman ways. despite a global insistence that no humans are involved. We await our response. In our present moment of alignment in the body, with the body being refused its future, acceptance feels like a collapse. The too muchness of recognition is collapsing not the self, but the humanity in the self. Devastated is the recognition the self should hold. Why won't we just engage the collapse and say, the future is behind us, while falling gently onto the couch, overheated in our cashmeres, understanding the world has lost its axis. Why can't we just understand we need to be understanding time differently? Delulu is the only Salulu. The theorists would have smiled at that and then quickly pivoted. They are still in the middle of the road, facing the traffic as if life functions such that one can say something is caught in the throat while the thing caught blocks the completed breath. The world tilts its head to one side, momentarily perplexed or satisfied with the distress. People are mean, people are brutal. A thought comes to them. If something is actually caught in the throat, a person can scream all they want, but no sound will come out. Whatever is then on mute. The worse can then live on repeat. That might be more preferable than the gas. Is astonishment allowed in this century? Do rules exist for within or beyond the collapse? We must have decided in our prior resilience that something else should always remain adjacent, a table's edge, a CPR-educated passerby with some practical knowledge, a DNR. We try to bet on the someone who will stop simply observing and who knows when to punch you in the chest. Voila, you are breathing again. It's a maneuver. Be grateful for it. Even then, in that moment, recalling the gasping for air as if for the first time, one has to physically embrace the violent encounter. The theorists could not be revived. They did not survive their fall into the difficulty of all. A terminal emergency, radiated, not innate, entered only through an encounter with the outside. What to live for, becoming what to die for in the doubling. The knee buckle, the ankle refusing to rotate, just as softening in the joints as the body goes to rest. If one could get closer, there is probably another kind of reflex indicating release, perhaps of the jaw. The theorist was outmaneuvered in mid-sentence, in the middle of everything, but not really. At the end, really. I know because that's where I find myself. To live at the end is to hold what is furthest in the future close. I can only attempt this by being literate about what the past put in place to pollute the flow of time. Every sunrise is a form of entropy. Theorists surely would have added, in this way, I remind myself of them. They thought all the straight talk would keep them upright. They thought straight talk was a natural addition in a neutral position. The way light, all that visibility, can make one get up and walk to a window, or step into the street, or run into the meadow, as if we were named Christina. It was never Christina's world. The news of this filled the theorists with immeasurable grief, then confusion about who needed to be grieved. That halted their breath. Imagine my concern for all selves. Imagine my concern for myself. At the appointed time, I will have to outrun the theorist's death in order to meet my own in the future. One at a time, one enters into the collapse. One at a time. The collapse is within the life within. There remains no real antidote to the collapse, except to collapse without coming apart while coming apart. My heart aches. Before another step, absorb the texture of whatever is touched when one touches down. My heart breaks. Break up the muted call with its fractured O, texture of whatever is touched when one touches down. It's never just the hard, familiar hit of ground. There's texture in whatever is touched when one touches down. Resist the frantic desire to undo the moment. Resist the fear of one's weight falling into the texture of whatever is touched when one touches down. Even if whatever is touched is a self broken apart until all the vowels are lost to consonants, the R's raging war, rousing the quiet sinking of bodies' final refusal to rise up. Rise up. Thank you.
I'm honored to be here. I thank Simon for inviting us. Honored to be here with Claudia, one of my heroes, and Kathy Park. Amazing writer. So thank you everybody for bringing me, us, Stacy from City Lights. Welcome. So I'm going to start off with where I am right now. I'm starting to take the success of the Barbie movie personally. And not in a good way. Let's not forget it was all the real-life white Barbies who voted for Trump, helping to sway the country's pendulum to the far right. It's also interesting how another feminist movie by a woman of color director almost went down in a flame of controversy, while a movie by a white woman director is catapulted to the top. I hope Greta Gerwig takes the Woman King sisterhood with her as she breaks box office records, and let's face it, life is too easy on Barbie Come to Life. What if she had an awakening like the white character in The Last King of Scotland and got to recognize, got a view into what's really going on here, all the abuses of human rights? What if she toured the shop in California where a white woman was murdered over her display of a rainbow flag? Or saw the gas station in New York where O'Shea Sibley, a young black gay man, was killed for voguing to a Beyonce song? Or met a 13-year-old girl in Mississippi who was raped and denied abortion as she started 7th grade? What if she were taken to every Skid Row homeless shelter in America and she saw where unwanted people were dumped? What if her relatives were caught up and drowned by a buoy on the Texas border to keep migrants out? What if she lost everything to AIDS, cancer, COVID? What if her GoFundMe to cover medical costs. I will say, I did think the beginning of Barbie was clever and brilliant, but it doesn't go very far. It's poignant when they show the ties around her wrists. Okay. I got the wrong. Oh, this happened to me yesterday. Okay. Wait. All right. Do we have a copy of it? Can I do this again? Yes?
Yes.
Are you guys like? All right. Do we have it? This
I have it.
Okay.
What page is Barbie?
Start it off, kids. All right, it's a little like, it's like kind of like a wardrobe malfunction. Okay, it's 114.
114. Right. There you go.
By the way, I also have a degree in theater. Okay, shall I start again or should I pick up from the middle? Pick up? Okay, so I will say, I did think the beginning of Barbie was clever and brilliant, but it doesn't go very far. It's poignant when they show the ties around her wrists. Barbie's been a slave too, but it doesn't tie to any other feminisms. Even though there's people of color, white Barbie is the bar for all other feminisms. America Ferrera is still a maid, rescuing her, applying Barbie's makeup, assuring real-world Barbie, who cries a lot, that she's still pretty. It's only by staying in their place Barbie is allowed to center her existential crisis. In an end that undermines the whole movie, Barbie apologizes to Ken, says maybe she did have too many girl parties. But she should apologize to America Ferrera and Issa Rae while she at times willfully slept in a life of privilege and endless parties in the Malibu dream house. Her sisters of color were out on the front lines doing the work, fighting the war. Barbie acts as if all Barbies of every class and race are all equal, but they are not. Just like The Handmaid's Tale adopts the language of Black history and struggle, they don't acknowledge how long after white Barbie it took to get a Black Barbie. How it took years of civil rights and the disappointment of little Black girls and boys, years of kids of color compare and despair, being measured against white Barbie's beauty standards. And I'm not even going to discuss queer issues. When America Ferrera's character tells Gay Allen to shut up so that there's a hierarchy and he's on the bottom. It's still hard for me to believe that we've gone from an uprising around George Floyd to a worldwide embrace of white Barbie. But I imagine it's something to do with the COVID pandemic, the difficult days needing relief. Or maybe it's like in a war when they used to send over blonde bombshell types to distract troops. Maybe Barbie is a distraction. And anywho, Barbie's awakening in 2023 is too late or way overdue. We needed her in the broad burning 70s to protest coat hanger abortions, to fight for civil rights, gay rights, trans rights, as a protester for Sandra Bland, Makia Bryant, and more. We need her right now on the front line to fight for Palestine. We need Barbie now. Woo. Despite horrible treatment, the lack of acceptance, care, the threats, giving away all I stand to inherit, despite the lies, the passing for white, the hatred towards Black women and girls, in specific me, despite the competing, the constant need to feel better than me at tremendous cost, despite the selfishness, the lack of generosity, never in my life receiving $5 except on Christmas, maybe. Despite the mental illness, the lack of responsibility by almost everyone, including her. I kind of still secretly admire my mother. That still, amidst all, she still creates her enemy, she still creates an escape. The only lessons of merit she gave were her black and blue bruises, the advice not to let it happen to me. Get an education, she'd say. Throughout all my father's beatings, she's always kept a blue suitcase. I'm leaving, she'd say, and though she never did, the last 20 years, she believes that there's a man who robs her daily, steals food, clothes, jewelry, takes knobs off drawers, destroys plants. She says, I'm moving. I gotta get away. I think of my mother still as one of the slaves I most admire. The ones who took freedom into their own hands, would not accept the yoke. Daily, she plans an escape. Even if it's dream or delusion, my mother is a runaway.
Yeah, you can clap.
After a reading, a guy came up and said, I really like that next day poem you read. Well, what are you talking about? I asked bewildered. I don't have a next day poem. He was like, you know, when you said if the Capitol rioters were black, there'd be no next day. Oh. I said, realizing he'd summarize as opposed to quoting exactly what I said, but essentially, yes. If the Capitol rioters were black, we all know that there'd be no next day. The police made a big deal arresting the white rioters days, weeks after, but we know if the rioters were black, they wouldn't have left Washington alive if any escaped. Washington would have been secured like a fortress in a war or a medieval film. Sky turned black with helicopters like vultures circling overhead. All over news, there'd be talk of manhunts, as they love to say. Police and FBI would have known exactly who and what number of people entered the building. They would have enacted something like COINTELPRO long before, like what was done to the Panthers. Spies sent to infiltrate Proud Boy and Oath Keeper organizations. FBI files on each one, every dirty deed, real or imagined, faces pinned to billboards, trackers on their phones, once arrested, thrown into solitary confinement. Some might have even hung themselves under mysterious circumstances, like Biko in South Africa and Sandra Blunt in Texas. And we all know they weren't actually suicidal at all. If the Capitol rioters had been black, we'd have known their names and their faces. They would have been plastered all over the news. There would have been no request for organic food awaiting trial. And there'd be no next day. This is from Funeral Diva. You're saying sidewalks. I was thinking about this piece. I'm not sure why, but it's taken forever for me to write this poem, and I hope to remember all the pieces. But I've developed a new condition, one that's come from age. I can no longer take the shit that I once did. And there's a part of my condition that comes from gentrification and cell phone use, living amidst tech zombies in their general fear and hatred of people of color. My condition is called sidewalk rage. So it's kind of like road rage, but it comes when I'm walking down the street and there's some millennial who's just moved into the neighborhood who thinks it's theirs, a white girl who in broad daylight feels a dark presence walking behind her, it's me, minding my own business, and she gets so panicked and paralyzed she stops walking and holds her purse, and with my new condition I yell, if you don't want to live around black people, get She is shocked. Or in another scenario, you see random white women on their phones standing in a doorway completely blocking it because you know only they exist, and you're like, hello, hello. Yes, all these years I've thought I was still a small town girl, and then suddenly with my sidewalk rage, I'm a bona fide New Yorker. Like the ones you've seen on bicycles banging on the hood of a taxi cab that tries to cut them off. My person with sidewalk rage is a character of their own, where once I was silent. Recently I confronted a man who was blocking my path, crossing the street. He had his head down and he almost rammed into me. I sucked my tongue really loud and I said, "No! He was so angry I confronted him. He yelled, I started to yell something back for fame, but I stopped myself. And then I was in the subway going downstairs and a white man rammed into me on the phone. My sidewalk rage kicked in and I thought for a second to sneak behind him and kick him down the stairs. That's my sidewalk rage, but I stopped myself. I don't know who this person is in me who would never speak up for herself, who was always soft and vulnerable, who's been at various times pickpocketed, blasphemed, body slammed, ransacked, ridiculed, who now has a voice, who now lets rage show, who couldn't express herself has now become all angles and sharp edges. Not, and this may stand on its own, but these are my jokes. If you happen to go outside and you see some lady, some bitch on the street, 50-ish, coat open, it's under 20 degrees, don't yell, are you fucking crazy? Leave her alone, she's in menopause, 0 degrees, 0 degrees, hot flash. That shit feels good. Also, if you're on a bus, on a train, and you really need to sit down, find a black man, a big black man. Next to him, the seat is always empty. Next to big black women, too. Sometimes on a crowded bus to Boston, the seat next to me is completely empty. And just so you know, I'm in a rage about crudité. Fuck crudité. Who eats crudité except for starving first-year college students at a book party? Really, what middle-aged person do you know is going to chew hard on a carrot stick at a party? It's not a barn, you know, a sheep or some shit. I mean, what about sensitivity to people with fake-ass teeth? I mean, I looked over recently at an event, and I saw some Brussels sprouts on a platter of crudité at a party. Raw-ass, hard-ass Brussels sprouts. No one is going to eat Brussels sprouts at a party. And to my point, no one touched them, and politics has ruined my ability to enjoy Christmas or escape. I love Christmas, I watched Frosty the Snowman with my mother over the holiday, but then politics came in. I started questioning if the relationship between Frosty and the little girl who loved him was age appropriate. Why did they hug so fucking much? I know he's supposed to be snow, which is why was he so fucking white? I mean, it's like hundreds of years of patriarchy you can't get out from under. My new accountant is a black man. He has tons of jokes. He said, the revolution is coming, and to those who say we don't serve blacks, it's okay because we don't eat them. Anyway, today, to be honest, I feel like Patsy in 12 Years a Slave. Beaten for picking cotton. I mean, I like somebody who is white, their partner is white, they have stocks, trust funds, a retirement plan, and I feel like fucking Patsy. In 12 Years a Slave, alternately known as Mary. You could go. Years ago, I was triggered by the announcement of this new and last Daniel Craig James Bond film. Triggered that they announced a new black lesbian 007. I was both excited at the prospect, which was unprecedented and long overdue, and at least 30 years before I had said to a lover, also a black lesbian, I want to play a black lesbian action figure, a detective, an agent, 30 years ago, but my dream was implausible. Lesbians of any kind had to be closeted. It angered me now that Hollywood has stolen a dream of mine, which had me tunneling down the halls of all the LGBTQIA creatives who've been sidelined and silenced, whose ideas, like stolen treasures looted from Africa and the Caribbean, were co-opted by straights, or told that they were sick and way, 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 way ahead of their time. I wanted to write a requiem for queer dreams, that massive grave where so many hopes and aspirations and desires and earnings and allowances were buried. This is in no way an analogy, but as an aside, an Indigenous student from Canada, when I asked about the graves they're finding of Indigenous children, he said the number is up to 5,000. He said sometimes the priests would get Indigenous girls pregnant and discard the babies, which is pure horror and evil. Also forced into government housing, not allowed to own their property. Another student from Cambodia whose parents survived Pol Pot, and the treacherous aftermath, books, libraries, learning destroyed, artists killed. Now imagine a graveyard for every gay and lesbian person through America's 300, 400, 500-year history, marked and crucified and killed. And then I started to think about what was previously unthinkable. People are now starting to talk reparations for Black Americans impacted generationally by slavery and segregation, and sometimes I teach Sekou's lyric poem, Come On, Bring On the Reparations. Instead of enjoying glorious freedom, they were dumped into a fragile economy with no earnings and no health care, no 40 acres and a mule. And while we're at it, I want this to serve as a letter, a law, an amendment, whatever, providing restitution for queers. For families and friends of loved ones who died and were injured by hands of homophobes, I want reparations for their lovers, friends, family, anyone impacted by corrective rape, shock therapy, conversion, injured within the medical system, all those queer children bullied on playgrounds who drank and drugged themselves to death because they couldn't face it. I want a check for every time some queer kid had to lie about who they were ostracized and thrown out of families, $1 for every LGBTQIA runaway, for those who did not make it, all the love unactualized, surrendered, those forced to live in invisible cells, real and imagined, but whose body, like mine, like slaves, has head-to-toe scars, hands, minds, wrists. I want money for all the queer creatives never allowed to see themselves in museums or galleries or on television and on bookshelves, and all of those that lost income when discovered at work, and all those relationships that were destroyed, millions for every holiday spent alone, because as Christos said, it is hard to love someone and or love oneself in a culture that thinks that you are a disease. Alone, forced separations, those that saw their partners die from cancer and AIDS and weren't allowed to visit or attend the funeral, who have their homes and lifetime leases because queer partnerships weren't recognized, who lost these things. I want millions and trillions for every sneer and jab, and those who got uninvited, compensation for every doctor and policeman that touched us with rubber gloves. I want it all. Dollars for every tear shed, added up, it would be trillions. The bodies of all those queers tossed away without rights and rights, uninterred and buried again with dignity. I want holidays named and markers given. I want history and herstory and non-binary books filled with our contributions for athletes and scientists and models and dancers and singers and doctors and nurses and artists, and for queers of color, I want extra. I want every main street in every town across America renamed Lesbian Way with Audre Lorde, June Jordan, and Pamela Sneed.
Got together with the collapse that Claudia is thinking about, and the too muchness, right? What is it in the too muchness that is working for you? Because, like, as we could hear, right, like the bringing together of all these different events without separating them. There's something there, like both aesthetically and content level, that drives a way of speaking that does not depend on categorization, but it's something that is also, in some sense, impossible. So I'm wondering, like, how is that going?
Well, I just wanted to add in that while you were reading, I was thinking so much of Cassandra, you know, like at the fall, you know, was it Troy? Yeah, it's like, yeah, I just had that sense of like that doom and that vision, you know, and yeah, and I think that's what poets do, and that's what you're doing, is like, you know, testifying and holding the vision while we are collapsing.
Well, I think your work is also doing it in a different mode. It's just more abstracted. But, you know, I'm really interested in this moment because so much about our current situation has to do with a desire to repress what's known. Whether it's book bans or misinformation or the inability to hold two ideas at one time, and the insistence, you know, Paul Celan said, what are these times when a conversation is a crime? Because it holds all that is explicit. I mean, to speak about all that is not acceptable right now. And what kind of work, especially in the institution of learning, you know, we're looking across at these universities where people are being fired for speaking about what is. And so, you know, so that to me is, how do you bring the too muchness of our reality back into the foreground of knowing when all of these things are about suppression?
Well, one of the things, I mean, I think about bell hooks a lot, and you know, her saying critical thinking has like saved my life, you know, and I've been thinking about that a lot and talking to students about it, and I critique film a lot, and I critique, you know, the media. And like one of the things that is interesting to me about film is that it's just like so huge, and that we're just supposed to be these passive recipients, right? And it really started for me around King Kong, because I had been to Ghana, I guess in 2005 for the first time, and it was the summer of Katrina. And then the first film that I saw when I came back was King Kong. And I'm like, are they still making this shit? I mean, like, really? You know what I'm saying? Peter Jackson. And I mean, it's interesting because there are parallels to 9/11 too, you know, and basically Kong is also like an American soldier, but he still is this like sort of racist trope. But one of the things that was important to me was to write about it, to speak about it, because I was like talking to my neighbor, and he's a black man, and he was like, I brought my niece to see that film, and I was just disgusted, you know, and it's just kind of like we have no voice, right? And so part of like what I'm trying to teach to my students, and like what I'm trying to do is to interact, you know, is to have a voice with all of these things that we're just supposed to passively kind of accept, right? And so we internalize it and we become silent. And so the whole like film industry, it needs to change in the sense that we're no longer voyeurs, but that we're active participants in it.
Yeah, but, I mean, that brings me also to how, like, what are the sources that you're citing, right? Like, in terms of, because the films are these constant encounters that come up in your work, Pamela, and then, you know, in Just Us, there's the everyday conversations, or the conversations in liminal time in airports and in airplanes. But then, in the new manuscript, Triage, there's that indebtedness, and I also thought about bell hooks in that, right? Like this kind of like, oh, the theory here is what we have now, or something. It's like you have moved past those everyday encounters in this new manuscript, and maybe even moved past like the moments in like in mass media, etc., where you're commenting, you know, as you do in Just Us, where you're commenting on contemporary events. But this is like a different kind of sediment, and theory comes forward. How, you know, and you're also writing with people who have passed. How is that voice happening for you? How has it changed also?
Well, I think the opening event in Triage was actually Lauren Ballant gave a talk in which she said, sometimes I just want to throw myself in the middle of the street. And so her voice, and she's a friend of mine, so her voice is pulled through, but not her as my friend, but her theory, which had so much to do with conceptualizing America and what it means when our principles of democracy don't actually realize our day-to-day life. And not just for people of color, also for white people. I mean, if the democracy doesn't work, it's not working for anybody. And in the long run. So I wanted to pull Lauren and Belle and all of these theorists through the manuscript, because we in this community spend so much time looking to these voices for solutions and language and ways of conceptualizing how to think about what is happening. And simultaneously, things are happening that the theory cannot save us from. So that's the place that this manuscript is sort of trying to negotiate.
Yeah. How is that for you? Because we're not like, there's not this indebtedness in the new manuscript on theory, but there is something new happening in terms of voice. Do you feel?
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer because a couple of things are on the table.
But can I just say, having read the manuscript, there is a way in which using cultural material to become the example of how we're failing and collapsing, that you begin to theorize. Not begin, you are theorizing. So it's as if the culture is through you becoming theorized in terms of what is and how it is made.
Absolutely. And I think the title is just triage is just sort of like so apropos for like what we're going through, you know, and just kind of like, I don't know, that middle place where we're just trying to stop the bleeding, you know. And I'm just thinking about all the police violence, 929 is really sort of is hinged upon Derek Chauvin and the amount of time that he sat on George Floyd's lawn. And I feel like there has to be a direct response to that. I feel like there has to be literature. And I mean, if this is an aside, but somebody called me after a police killing, and they asked me if I was okay. And it was like the first time that anyone ever acknowledged like what that it does to us, like constantly. I mean, we know it, but the place of grief and just sort of like, we're not even supposed to talk about it. We're just supposed to keep going, keep going, keep going. You know what I'm saying? And and so the bottom line is that there is so much grief, and I felt the commonality in our grief, and then also trying to like sort of like stop the bleeding, stop So it just feels like such testimony. Like both of the manuscripts very much speak to this time, and trying to also create a language for what's happening to us, it's a lot, it's a lot, and then we have something like Barbie come, and it's like, woo, yeah, it's like, oh my God, and I didn't hate it, but I
would have liked Barbie better if they had admitted that Barbie came from Nazi Germany. That was the cartoons that were given to the Germans. So that's why Barbie looks so
Aryan?
not Aryan, but so voluptuous. Who makes a doll that looks like that? Unless it was not intended for children.
Right.
And it was not intended for children.
Right. But then also it's like a white woman who bought and sold it, right? So then it's kind of like, who's making these Barbies? So then I'm like, well, by Woman King standards, wouldn't she be a slave trader? I mean, I'm just saying, you know what I mean? If Barbie's a slave, where'd it come from?
In order for that to happen, right? In order for the acknowledgement of Barbie coming from Germany, Nazi Germany, there would have to be maybe a slowing down or something. And in the film, right, there would have to be footnotes. And and you do that, the footnotes, great bridge, in Just Us. But I'm also bringing it up because of how you're talking about like this question of time, right? What are the velocities with which you're writing? So I'm feeling the collapse in this manuscript, right? In the last manuscript, comes kind of with a slowness. And you've done that, Claudia, you've done that also in Situation 1, one of the films that you made with John Lucas, right? Where you're slowing down a moment and inserting all these different moments of poetry. Poetry and citation in some ways. And I'm thinking also about time in relationship to like the velocity, not just your performance, the speeding up, the slowing down, but also like the cramping almost, right? The cramping in of different events in one poem and refusing that they should be handled as separate.
Right, and the manuscript is about time. I mean, it's like, it's the time that, Derek Chauvin's out on George Floyd's neck, and then it's like, it is a combustion of events, right? So it's my parents' death, meets the George Floyd uprising, meets the pandemic, right? So it's all those things happening all at once, right? And so like the intensity of it, and I wasn't really sure if it was going to work, to put all those things together, because it's how they exist in my sphere, but yeah, I think it does work, but yeah, it is about time and looking at time and all of these things that are sort of like compacted and sort of like layered on, so, and then like, we got the George Floyd uprising because of the COVID pandemic, right? So it's like, finally people weren't like, running around and like just like kind of numb and just surviving, and it's like they had a moment to look, and then they were like, oh shit, this is awful, you know what I mean? Let's get out on the streets, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, it's all about time, yeah.
Well, I think the slowing down for me has to do also with affect. I think if we continue to move forward without understanding the impact of events on us, then we do things that don't make sense. We attack people who aren't really the perpetrators. We are trying to hold off refugees and other people, even as we have devastated their countries. So I think there's a real need to kind of slow it down so we understand our complicity as well as the reality.
Since it's so close to the delusion, right, and so close to the collapse, and so close to the grief, with the Racial Imaginary Institute, which you co-founded, Claudia, there's like, I'm just telling you that.
How would you perform for us?
Yeah. It was a great honor. I read from an old manuscript that's become a new manuscript. Imagine being more afraid of freedom than slavery. And basically, it just was republished. And they said they wanted me to be a lesbian classic. Ham.
But you also, I mean, the Racial Imaginary Institute, so like the role of imagination in countering anti-Black racism is sort of pivotal for the Racial Imaginary Institute. You yesterday, I'm just telling you now, so you yesterday, you said that you do, you get a little soggy and warm when it comes to art. You have a kind of hope there around art and what artists can do. However, so I'm sort of thinking like, what is the delusion, the delulu, is this a lulu? Yeah. How does that relate to the sort of optimism that you both have around imagination?
Well, I don't know. It's interesting because that's what I was thinking about Cassandra, because I remember when I was in school and I was like, Cassandra had hope, and the teacher was like, it's not about hope, And I was like, and yes, she was hopeful, And it was like, no, she was a witness. She was telling the story, She was the seer, And so, and I felt that really strongly, I didn't feel, there's hope in creating the language for it, but I didn't feel like it was, to say that the future is behind us, it's like, it's an important reality, you know what I mean? And so in that regard, I didn't feel a sentimentality around it. I felt like that you're naming something that is just really important to be named, you know what I'm saying? So it's not, I don't know, hope didn't feel like the word for me. I don't know if that's what you're thinking of, but I felt like you were a witness, just a soldier, and you're telling us, So that was really powerful for me. And I do, in terms of hope, in terms of my work, I do really believe in art, I feel like that poets, I think both of us, here today kind of exemplify the idea that the people who are testifying, the people who have the information, the people who are the seers, the people who can provide healing and all of that are the poets, right? And that we have to look to the poets, right? And so we're looking to all these people, the politicians, and that's a shit show, right? And then we have, so we have the politicians or whoever else, the news, all of that stuff, and that's celebrity gossip every day, right? And so where do we look, And I just saw the Nikki Giovanni documentary, Life on Mars, and I had some. It was okay, but I was really excited at the idea that they went to the poets, that they're listening to the poet, right? Because, one of the things that they didn't cover was that when she was teaching at Virginia Tech, that kid that shot up Virginia Tech, Nikki Giovanni was the first person who said, look, you need to check this guy out, he's and they didn't listen to her, do you know what I'm saying? And so I'm listen to the poets, you know what I'm saying? So I just feel like we provide a really important service, and in that, I feel like there's, I feel like that's hope,
Hope. I don't think hope. I think health.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was more thinking that it's not really good for us to be in the doodle-oo. It's not a Zulu. This is not. I think, there's no way to prove this, obviously, but we are not the only ones who have moved to the right. We have a global tendency happening right now. And it's manifesting itself in war, in all kinds of things that are not pretty to look at. But I feel, and no way to prove, that people are terrified about climate change. They're terrified about resources, the loss of them. And what is really happening is a kind of move to, there's a war on resources in the imagination, but it's taking itself out on the populations. Because there is no way that you can really take in the information around what is happening to the planet and not be processing it in one way or another. So what do? You're Britain, you're like, get out. All of you, get out, go back to your countries. We're not gonna share resources with your Norway, you're like, this oil is ours. Get out. You're in the United States, you're like, build a wall. You're that country that will not be named. You're Russia. So it's showing itself in murder, in genocide, in wall building, in all kinds of things. But under it is terror of what is coming. Because why wouldn't there be that? Why wouldn't we be afraid of that? Why wouldn't we want to discount the science? It, in a sense, makes sense. But it's not healthy. Instead of trying to figure out what to do, we're like, put a lid on it. And this is mine, and this is mine. So I think it's about, for me, it's about health. It's not about health. Because reality is reality. Unless if I have hope, I have it in y'all. And I mean this, in a generation of people who have come up, and I write about this in Triage, who have come up and are able to say things like, I am going to take a break from my fantastic tennis career. See you later. I'll be back when I'm ready. Or, there are these young women who are doing these things that we did not feel we could do. We are Justice Jackson, facing the Senate and able to cry. It's like, you all are fuckers, and you're breaking my heart. So I'm gonna cry right here now. I mean, these are unprecedented moments of breakdown, but breakdown in the right direction. It's like, whatever is happening, I need to express a few things about how I'm feeling about it. So that is what gives me hope.
And the ability, like fear saying no for the first time ever, right? We've never been allowed to say no. So to say, hearing them say no is like a really powerful thing. And I was thinking about something else with regard to like standing, I was thinking about like Audre Lorde, poetry is not a luxury, and like the ability, like knowing that we can express our feelings, like not suppressing, not keep going, so that we never have a chance to actually register what's happening. So it is like, using our feelings, being able to cry, being able to be in that moment. Like that's very Audre Lorde. That's very poetry is not a luxury. That's very not like silencing the feminine that's within us.
I saw Cameron Awkward-Rich, poet also, read this weekend, and he brought in the no over and over again. It was pages of no. I'm thinking about what you're saying about the service that you poets provide. And so I want to think a little bit with you on practice, right? And the kind of the way in which you use strategies as a form of storytelling. It also made me think, and just in what you were saying just now, right? Like the holding two thoughts together and the possibility of that. It made me think of something that Fumi Okichi, who I earlier mentioned, who was here at Rhetoric, right, writes about in relationship to something that you say in, I think it's Citizen, where it's, if white people cannot police their imagination, black people continue to be killed. And Fumi turns that around and says, no, it's actually that white people are policing their imagination. It's the impossibility to be and think with something that is unrelated, which brings me to this holding two different thoughts at the same time. And it brings me to this, what you were saying about the war on information, like this impossibility of holding all of it together in the collapse.
It's also like, it's like back to slavery, you know what I mean? It's just like, if they can't read, if they don't read, they can't imagine something different for themselves, right? And so that's why, that's the book banning, there are the culture wars, yes, but it's like, it's as basic as like slavery, it's like if we take away those books, they can't imagine anything other, they can't form thoughts, they can't imagine themselves, a way out of here, So it's, to destroy our imagination, to destroy our ability to critique, to destroy our ability to discern, that's what we're fighting now.
What are the strategies that come up for you, like on an aesthetic level, that you bring in to be able to narrate that unrelatedness, right? Holding that unrelatedness?
Well, I think in this book, which functions a little bit differently than the others, there's less of a need to provide information. I'm not really interested in educating anybody on anything. And, it might sound strange, but to be able to stay in the moment of a thing for as long as I can stay with it. I'm really interested in what that looks like. Which means I'm not so interested in entertaining the reader. It's like, you can stay with me or you could leave. But I'm going to turn this thing over until I cannot see it anymore. But it's not going to end in any saloon. It's just going to be inside the looking and the feeling of it. And that, it's a different kind of patience with it. One of the things I want to write about is that James Bond film, because
Does it Get On Up?
No, the one you write.
Oh, No Time to Die.
No Time to Die. Because I love that. First of all, this black woman now she's 007. But I don't know how many people saw that film, No Time to Die. You know, I love James Bond films because they're great for exercising. You know? There's a lot of like moving fast, which is alien to me, so I'm like, oh, great. But in that film, she is 007. You're like, oh my God, a black woman's 007. Oh. But then 007 comes back.
Right.
And then,
placeholder.
yeah, so then, no. So then she has to say, what's a number? What's a number? Nothing. What's in a number? You can have your numbers back. And she ends up being the nanny.
Exactly.
In the final scene. He's like, watch my child.
Right. That's the last scene.
Oh, sorry, that's probably a spoiler. Sorry. But that kind of, that is fascinating.
Yeah, I did write about that. That's on the second page. But yeah, I think about like, I mean, in terms of strategies, like, it's not necessary. I mean, there's craft. It's like how you build a poem and stuff like that. I mean, maybe that's a strategy, but I think mainly like what I talk to my students about. Like we've been taught that like we break a silence and it happens like once in a life, right? But I feel like art or particularly writing is a process of breaking silences, right? So that my motivation or like how I'm pushing myself is what silence am I going to break, right? Like how am I going to keep taking these risks? How am I going to because it is a process. It's a lifetime, right? Of unlearning, of speaking truth to power. All of those things, and so that, I mean, that's my strategy, you know what I mean? It's not necessarily for the world, it's for me as an artist, like how I'm going to push myself, what silence am I going to break, hopefully somebody can like relate to that, hopefully that I, you know, inspire that then in somebody else, but that's what I'm attempting to do.
And then sometimes there's also what I would say strategic silencing. In redaction, for example. So you both use redaction as a method, like whether that's just crossing out text in Just Us, this happens quite a bit, right? To centralize something else. You do it with history, crossing out the history into her story or something else completely. But okay, that's me just saying like this is what you've been doing. But I'm wondering also because both of you work a lot with visual. Whether that's working visual art or whether that's implementing the pictures or photographs into your work. Do you want to talk about that as a strategy? How that works and how that's...
Well, I am really interested in tapping into another mode of processing things. And for me, the visuals allow for that. So that to read and to think through a thing is one thing, to see an image and to associate is another thing, and to think about the image as a readable text, but also as triggering other kinds of images. So I like the idea of bringing the two forms together as a way of even slowing it down more, and allowing the reader to move away from the text to return to the text, if they choose to. And the images in triage work a little bit differently because they're not elucidating the text, they're creating a space, a visual space for collapse. So it's a different dynamic.
Can you describe what you mean when you're saying that creating a different space for collapse?
Well, I'm really interested in artists who have used the couch in their work, as a place to give us a kind of rest. Jennifer Packer in Rhetoric, that morning piece. Saarloos, all her work around the patriarchy, sexism, Martin Simmons. So there's a lot of taking that work and pushing it to be in conversation with this idea of norms.
It's also like, it's reminding me of like Lorna Simpson and even like, you know, Audrey and like the kitchen table press and like, you know, Black women centering the kitchen table, Bell, right, so that's interesting. One of the things that I think about with regard to visual work, and I love that, you know, just different modes, you know, I feel like they're very related, you know, in the sense that like, when I'm making visual work or whatever, like I process poetry, I'm processing my poetry, you know, through it. So there's something like related, but I also think that like we're multilingual, like, you know, human beings, and like one of the things that like Western education has done, you know, is like sort of like the mind, body, you know, spirit, like split, right? And so in a way we've been made to like sort of split off all of our artistry, right? So we told science was here, we were told poetry was there, we were told theater was way down, you know what I'm saying? And so the bottom line is I don't think that that's the way that we really process as artists, right? And I feel like now there is a movement towards the interdisciplinary, the multidisciplinary, and like, you know, for me, I grew up in church, you know, and like it was called speaking in tongues, right? And so we have like many languages, and so I feel like part of like decolonization and all of that is to be able to speak in our natural tongues, the tongues that we choose, and the tongues that we learn, and not try to create all these like sort of like factions between things, you know what I mean?
Kind of monument place or like creating new monuments. But I also know that in Berkeley, people actually do go to bed at 8:30. So, and we're approaching 8. And I want to make sure that at least also the audience has a chance, right, to ask questions, and then we can maybe read for those who want to stay. Is that a good moment for you? Yeah. Questions.
I see a hand.
Should I run the microphone?
Hi, thank you both. My name is Hallie. This is a question for both of you, but maybe more for Professor Rankine to start with. And thank you both for being here. It's really, really lovely to hear from you. I was just thinking about Berlant a lot as you were reading, so I was curious and interested when you said that that was the theorist you had in mind.
One of them.
One of them. And I was wondering, in the way that you are thinking of time, because I know that a lot of Berlant lives in the impasse, in ordinary crisisness, and I felt maybe that what was happening in time in your piece was different, so I was wondering if triage for you lives in the impasse or something else.
Well, it's the crisis ordinary that is actually time, that's actually passing. It's not stopping. It's not an inability to get to the next thing. It is the next thing. You know, we're moving from crisis to crisis. So in that way, it's different and the same. And I think Lauren actually means it that way, in the sense that she doesn't understand it. She doesn't present it as a possibility of another place. I think she sees it as the continuous, a kind of continuous time. Oh, okay.
Question.
Thank you both for your service as truth tellers and poets, and also for being here today and bringing presence and breath to your words. My question is also about time. If we're always living with the past in our bodies and in the spaces we occupy, and the future is behind us, what is the kind of framework that we can use, or what are the strategies that you use in your life to absorb all of those timelines without kind of splitting open at the seams. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense.
Well, do people know Reverend Billy? I like Reverend Billy a lot, right? And he's a preacher, he's a performance artist, and he was talking. His latest video, it's like 2 minutes long, and he's in Times Square, and he's talking about like all the superstorms and us, being survivors of the superstorms, and that they're going to keep coming, and that they're going to keep coming, and that we've basically manifested all of these storms, right? And that one of the things happens if we survive, that like we're no longer just consumers, right? Moving from one consumption and one thing to another, but he says, there are circular economies that kind of like emerge, and that we, survivors want to give to another survivor. It's like, well, I have this, you have that, can we collaborate, right? How can I lift your spirits? And so thinking about, like, I'm trying to think of like alternatives, I think that there needs to be, and I like that piece because it's like an alternative to capitalism, right? And I think we need to think about that. And I'm getting ready to do a show with Greg Bortowitz for Performa, and it's on healthcare. And Viva Ruiz, who does Thank God for Abortion, is basically going to show us like how to give an abortion on a papaya, right? And it's like, skills that we need for, for the apocalypse, you know what I mean? And so I like to think of alternatives, but I think that's like why I make art, is that I'm always just trying to, that is like my way of dealing with time and dealing with all of these different ordeals, and basically I guess how I slow it down, how I process it, how I heal, how I communicate. So I turn to art for them.
Well, I think this idea of slowing it down is where we live now. Everything we hear is like, if we could all drive Teslas, that would slow it down. If we could, and the list goes on and on. I mean, if you're Gates, you think it's cement that's killing us. So I'm really interested in what it means to slow things down, as you say. Not to pretend that we can catapult ourselves into a solution that doesn't involve the problems as they stand, but rather how do we slow it down? How do we get ourselves more time?
And alongside that, like I think Marina Abramovic is like really, really, quite visionary in the sense that she said, the artist is present, right? And like you can read that in so many different ways, and like over time, every time you could hear something different. But like there's also, a war on us being present, right? So that is the frontier, that is the final frontier, right? And that is basically our ability to, the smartphones, like the media, all this stuff is fast. And it's taking away our ability to really be here, right? To be in the moment. And so basically, that the war is, how do we fight back to be present, right? How do we stay present? That's the frontier.
Are there any more questions?
Hello. I feel like any praise would be trite, but I just want to say thank you. You guys are stunning and wonderful, and seeing you guys as like an example of what next generation can be is very enlightening. You guys seem very interested, in holding like these histories within you, and I was very enthralled by you talking about slavery, and how like slavery and those histories and capitalism is like ever present within your work, and like the whole idea of like decolonizing and splitting up the mind, body, spirit. Is there any special like relationship you have with like embodying like these facets of yourselves like in your poetry that you may want to like speak on? If that question makes sense.
Not completely following.
Okay.
Give me a little bit more.
Like having these histories and these problems be like present within your work. Is there any sort of like special like relationship you have to then like bringing these histories to light in your poetry?
Well, I think, we're always talking about like erasure, and we're always talking about like things like being made invisible, right? And we're talking about breaking silence, and so basically, coming to voice, right? And so, Funeral Diva, I wrote about all of like my Black, gay, male, and Latinx friends who, died of AIDS, right? And then all the women who died of cancer, right? And so in that regard, like I'm trying to create like histories or herstories, trend stories. I'm trying to, I'm trying to create a document where one doesn't exist, right? I think like, embodying all these different things, like I feel like I went to Ghana, I guess in 2005 for the first time, and I was at Cape Coast Castle, and I thought I was going as a tourist, but then it was like a life journey. It was like a spiritual journey. It was a pilgrimage. I didn't even know, I was like, I'm gonna go hang out, you know what I mean? And so it ended up like really changing my life. But one of the things, like, I wrote a poem and said, I made 2 promises that, in my life, I made a promise to the people that I came up with that I would always, like, remember them and I would always write about them. And then I made a promise when I was at Cape Coast Castle that I would always, like, one of the things that I discovered was just how nameless, like, people were like, I don't want to hear it about Black history, but it's like, honey, you never have. Don't worry about it, you haven't, you know what I'm saying? And so, like, literally the millions, that are invisible, whose names were taken, whose stories that we never heard, whose families that we never heard of. So, I vowed that, that I would do that work, right? So, that's like always with me, I think. And interestingly enough, I just wrote the introduction to Saarloos Saint's new book. He died, but like his book is being republished, Sacred Spells, and I've gone to 2 events to basically read the introduction, and each time I think I almost fell out. I was like, church! I was like, oh, woo! Wow, and I was like, I could feel like a sorrow, with me, and so, it's like I didn't, start out with that intention. I was just going to read but each time it just became this like really spiritual experience. So I feel like, those spirits do inhabit, I think that's the role of the artist as well, that, like spirits or whatever you believe in, like they definitely use us. They definitely, you know what I'm saying? We're translators,
Yeah, I'm with her on that, the translation.
Thank you.
I don't know how to honor what you said. Staying present is the frontier line, while also saying that we could wrap it up. But I'm holding 2 thoughts that contradict. I'm holding them together, which I learned is possible.
Oh, yeah.
And just so that we know what to look forward to, since we learned that there's so little to look forward to.
No, there's a lot to
When do the books come out?
I have no idea.